If you're wondering what the ambient noise is, I'm broadcasting from CJ Cannon's out at Vero's Municipal Airport Strip in Vero Beach, Florida. Great place to fly into. Stop at CJ Cannon's for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. I'm Rhett Palmer, the mayor of the airway. He's been shot at. He's been sliced with a razor. He had a near-death experience after having surgery for being shot. He's an artist. It's quite a tale. How you doing, Willie?
Hey, how you doing?
Willie with one L, Wil Harris, good morning to you. This is Rhett Palmer, and I'm glad you're taking this time to be with me over here at CJ Cannon's.
It is a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, now, where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Miami, Florida. I was raised in Ohio.
And I know you've had art shows, and your art is being appreciated by many people. And that's how I found out about you. Saw you in some local newspapers. And you're going to have an art show around here again soon. What I want to ask you today is, let's go back to your beginnings. Where were you born?
I was born in Miami, Florida. My grandfather actually raised us. My mom, she was a young mother. She had my first brother when she was 16. So by the time I came along, she was still fairly young, and she still needed to find herself. So we were left in the care of my grandfather, actually.
And your grandfather had a junk shop, kind of like Sanford and Son, right?
Well,
are you too young to remember Sanford and Son?
I remember Sanford and Son, but to be honest, Sanford and Son were doing a lot better than my grandfather. So, we were definitely, we came up, we were poor, and my grandfather was a veteran of World War II, actually. He signed his name with an X. So he had an incident with my father. My father is a veteran of Vietnam, and while he was very abusive to my mother, while my mother was pregnant with me, my father was beating her in the front yard, and my grandfather jumped off the porch with a stick to hit my father with it, and my father reacted to it and pulled out a gun and pointed it at my grandfather and was going to shoot him and kill him. And, my uncle was in the car and got out and stopped my father and told him he was wrong, talked him down, and he got in the car and they left. But my grandfather never forgot about that. So growing up, my grandfather was very, very abusive towards me, and I never knew why. I didn't find out about, the incident with my father until I was about 18.
Oh, so he associated you because you had your father's blood with your father and held that against. What happened to your spirit? I know you must remember.
I think that, sometimes we start living a self-fulfilled prophecy. A lot of times when you're a young kid, an adult with influence over you says certain things, you take it as fact. And I was illiterate. I remember being in the first grade and being an illiterate kid. I couldn't read, I couldn't write, I didn't know my color. It wasn't until, my mom eventually moved us to Ohio that I actually started a teacher. Her name was Mrs. Lusick. I actually took the time. I had a speech impediment. I spoke with a lisp.
What happened after that? I mean, did you two ever reconcile?
We never reconciled because I ended up growing up in Ohio, but we would always come back to Florida for the summers. And when we come back to Miami for the summers, we always stayed with my grandfather. So I remember probably when I was around 15 or 16, I was getting taller, I was getting bigger, and I think it was a mutual respect. He had more respect for me, because it was like raising a pit bull, and he wanted me to be mean, and he wanted me to be tough, and he definitely, caused me to be mean and tough growing up, and I think he respected that out of me.
And you end up being, what would it be called? They say gangsta.
Definitely.
You seem like such a mild-mannered artist now. You're a handsome young guy. You got a great smile. I think you have a kind heart, and yet you were a gangster. You're the second gangster I've run into recently, too. You were a bully?
Kid who wasn't in that life, we never bothered them. But if it was another fellow so-called gangster, or if you thought you were tougher, or if you were a bully, then we were going to ensure that you weren't going to be bothering us.
Wow. So now you end up in a shootout, right?
Well, actually, I was in a fight. I didn't have any of my friends around, and I had these two guys, and we had some words exchanged, and we got into a fight, and I didn't know was the other one had pulled out a gun, and he shot me. But as it traveled, it went through my stomach, it went through my appendix, it hit my small intestine. They had to take part of that out. It went through my bladder.
Okay, now what happens now? Do somebody call an ambulance, the cops? What happens now? You've been shot. They run off?
Yeah, they ran off. They left me for dead. I was actually unconscious at this point. And when I woke up, I was in the ambulance. I just remember being in the ambulance. I remember going in and out of consciousness. And my knees were knocking together. I was sweating. My teeth were chattering as though I was in cold weather, but I couldn't stop my teeth from chattering. I was going through shock. I didn't know it. thought it was maybe in my leg, and until a nurse came in and gave me a catheter. And when she gave me a catheter, it was filled with blood. And from there, they knew I had internal bleeding and that it was very serious. So they rushed me into the emergency. And while they were rushing me into the emergency, I just felt something come over me. I just felt I was dying. And I said to the anesthesiologist, I said to him as he was putting the mask over my face, I held his hand. I said, please don't let me die. And he said, you're not going to die. And he put the mask over my face. And from there, I woke up in an intensive care. They were giving me shots of Demerol. I didn't know it was Demerol at the time, but I found out a tube going down my nose into my stomach. They had me hooked up a breathing machine, had IVs coming out of my arm, and I was in bad shape. I was weak. I couldn't even ball my fist, and the surgeon was standing over me, and he looked at me and said, you're a very lucky young man. You had died for 7 minutes.
Died for 7 minutes? Wow. So did this experience change your life?
Oh, it changed my life profoundly. From there, I couldn't go back to looking at things and looking at life the way I had before. It was like night and day. It was like I had an epiphany. It was like it changed my paradigm, the way I viewed the world and the way I looked at the world.
Just this morning, I was reading in the paper, there was this guy. He happens to have been from Vero Beach, Florida. I don't know how he ended up in Jacksonville. He's a white guy. There was a group of black kids in a car. I don't know what was said. There was an altercation. He claims that he was in fear of his life. Anyway, he started shooting at the car, and they drove off. He killed a young boy, and he's gone to jail now for the remainder. He's got a minimum of 60 years, they just declared. But I was crying this morning because the mother, this black lady, she was in the court, and she said, this boy was precious to us, and he was the joy of our household. But I have to forgive you, and I do forgive you. And she forgave the man. That takes Jesus to do something like that. Were you able, in your heart, to forgive the guys that shot you?
Oh, definitely. I was able.
How? How did you do that?
Because I was forgiven. I was given another opportunity. My life was spared. Someone had a plan stronger than what my plan was, and it was to come back and to talk to young kids and talk to people about what I experienced so that my life wouldn't be a life in vain.
How did that happen? You ended up traveling around the world for 10 years, speaking to different youth groups, and you were actually paid for that. How did that happen?
Well, there was a lady, her name is Beverly Pollard. She runs a nonprofit organization. It's called the Warren UMADOP, which is the Urban Minority Alcohol and Drug Abuse Outreach Program in Warren, Ohio. She wanted me to speak to a youth group that she had at the Juvenile Justice Center. So I obliged her. I went and spoke to this group, and it was about 8 young kids, and they were just amazed at, what I talked about and what I described. And I told them about being in shootouts and having bullets whiz past my ear like mosquitoes and having all these close calls. And each close call made me feel more and more invincible. And I let them know that I really wasn't invincible and that they weren't invincible. And they were so captivated that she asked me to volunteer with her agency. And I did that for about maybe 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, she actually hired me on as a permanent staff. From there, she had a budget for trainings, and she would send me all over the country. She would send me to Atlantic City. I would go to Georgia. She would send me to California. Wherever there was a training, she had a catalog, and I would just pick where I wanted to go. And we did that for the next 10 years. I traveled around, and I got trainings in self-esteem, conflict resolution, anger management, which were tools to help me better, present myself or present my message, have something that's, practical that I can talk about that these kids needed, which was self-esteem and conflict resolution, because a lot of us, me included at the time, had a false sense of self-esteem. We thought our self-esteem was about what we drove, what we wore, our clothes, jewelry, and things, and it's really not. Self-esteem is the key word, is self. It's about how much you love yourself, and once you love yourself, you can love other people. You can't give away what you don't have, and I had to learn that, and because of that agency, I was able to learn that. It happened during the time that I met Congressman Tim Ryan, and I was speaking, and he heard me speak, and he actually offered me a position as a congressional aide with him, and was a congressional aide for the congressman. I worked for the congressman for about 3 years, and then I became the director of the Young Black Men's Association. I never had my father in my life. I remember being a kid when I was 3 or 4, and that's one of the reasons why I became such a tough kid, is because I felt like I wanted someone to come and protect me. In my neighborhood, the bullies and the older kids, and no one ever came and did that for me. So as I became older, I became that protector. I became that person to protect myself all of my life, and I don't take credit for any of the good things that ever happened in my life. I've been working and trying to control my life, and everything, and every decision I ever made it was the wrong decision. Everything I tried to force happen always went wrong. So I never was good at controlling or directing my life. Once I turned those situations over to God and just got out of the way, God was able to make me look good.
I like that, getting out of the way and letting God.
I've been trying to help people all my life, but not helping myself. There was something inside of me, deep down inside of me, that I couldn't feel. There was a hole that needed to be filled. So no matter how successful I was or what I've accomplished in my life, I still couldn't fill that hole. No matter how many kids I helped, I still couldn't fill that hole that was deep down inside of me.
How? What is that hole, and how are you filling it?
Respecting my accomplishments that I've already made, thankful, being grateful, and compassion to other people, and expect anyone to be what I want them to be. In life, you only control one thing, and that's yourself.
So here we are at this powerful word called surrender.
Yes, there's the serenity prayer. They say it in AA. Even though I've never been a drinker.
That's right. It's all about surrender. Let me ask you this. How did you end up? You've been in multiple newspapers locally. Now you're going to be on Vero's Voice magazine. You're on my radio show. How did the press first find out about you? Was it Mrs. Jenke?
There is Barbara Petrillo. She does jury locally. And her and I met at an event. So she invited me to a few business mixers. The opportunity came up at the Lighthouse Framing Art Gallery. And, she said she pulled me in on this art show. And then, we talked to Mrs. Jenke, and Ms. Jenke handled the marketing for the event because Ms. Jenke is very, she's very protective of those who are in her care. Born and raised a Baptist, so spirituality and God is very important to me in my life.
We're out of time for today, but Willie, hope you'll come back in the future. If people want to get in touch with you, you got an email address?
Yes, they can reach me at Harris_WIL@hotmail.com.
Thank you, Willie. God bless you, love you in the Lord, and hope to get to know you better. I just met him today. What an amazing young man. This is the mayor of the airwaves, who loves you, baby.